Abishag, what are you doing back here again so soon? You came to share breakfast with me? Well, that's wonderful. What, you want to hear the story again? Did Bathsheba send you again? I know her trick. She thinks that the more I tell it, the more I'll be happy with it. Yes, I'll tell the story, and yes, her trick works. For the more I tell it, the happier I am with it. Well, Abishag, first I want to know, how are things going with the king? You see, Bathsheba was right. I am not as bitter against him. I hold him in contempt no longer. I care, for he was my first love. So I am glad to know that things are fine with him. You have news for me, but you won't tell me till I'm done telling my story? Okay, then I'd best get started. Well, as you remember from before, my father was the king. He had been chosen by God in the time of Samuel the prophet. Samuel had been given to the Lord by his mother Hannah, who had borne no children and sought the Lord, and the Lord blessed her with Samuel, and she presented him her offering to the Lord, and the Lord blessed her with many more daughters and sons after that. But Samuel grew and became a man of God, wearing the linen ephod of God that the priests would wear. He was raised by the priests, and God exalted Samuel to be a prophet in the land. And the Lord spoke to Samuel from the time he was a child. And the Lord told Samuel one day that he should go and anoint the next person for God. And that person was going to be different than any person that the Hebrew nation ever had. For the Israelites belonged to God. They were God's people. But they cried out to have a king like all the other nations. And Samuel tried to dissuade them. He told them, if you have a king, they'll take your sons and your daughters and your property, and he'll take your life and all of your goods and gold. But the people would not be dissuaded. They wanted a king. And so one day, God told Samuel, tomorrow at this time you will anoint the king of Israel. And it came to pass that my father, who was just a teenager at the time, was sent by his father to go find some animals that had been lost. And he took with him one servant, and he went from town to town in the city, in the country, and he was gone for a very long time, and he could not find the lost animals. So finally there was a good suggestion made that he find the man of God, the prophet of God, who could tell him where the animals were. But by that time they had used up all of their bread, all of their meat, all of their wine, everything that they had brought, but they had just a fourth part of a shekel left. And they said, well, we'll go to the prophet and we'll give him a fourth part of the shekel, and he will tell us. And so they came upon some girls, and they said, we heard that there's a seer, for prophets used to be called seers. We heard that there's a seer nearby. Where? And the girls directed the two men. When they came to Samuel, Samuel told them of his story and told Saul that he would be anointed king of Israel. Saul was a gorgeous man. He stood head and shoulders above everyone else. And so it was that the anointing took place, and Saul returned to his home, and Samuel came after him and brought attention to him as God's anointed. And he was accepted by most of the people. Not all of the people, but he was accepted by most of the people. And so he began as king. And he began to wage war against the enemies of Israel. And that's why they wanted a king. They wanted a leader who would take up their cause, who would fight for them. And that's why God had answered their prayer, because when the people cried out, God gave them what they wanted. That's why we must be careful what we ask for, because God will give it to us, because God honors our will. If we want more of God, then God will give us more of himself. If we want more of something else, often God will give us that, unless we've made a previous bargain with God that nevertheless not my will but thine be done. And so Abishag, you're young yet. Remember that. Watch what you pray for, because you will get it. And so the people had cried out that they wanted a king, and a king came to lead them. And so my father Saul began vanquishing the enemies, the Philistines, the Amalekites, the Ammonites. And in the course of time, he took a wife, my mother, Ahinoam. And she was a wonderful, wonderful woman. In time, he grew to not appreciate her, but she bore him 4 sons and 2 daughters. My brother Jonathan, Ishvi, Malchishua, and our brother Boseth. My sister Mirab was older than I, and my father was in a battle with the Philistines almost all of the time, off and on, all of the time. For the Israelites had moved into the land of the Philistines, and they were trying to push them farther and farther away, for as our nation grew and prospered, we needed more land and more space for our cattle, for our families, for our sheep. And so it was that in the course of time, Father became depressed because he was always fighting. And when he was depressed, he would find comfort in music. And so musicians would come to play for him, and he would be appeased for a time. But his depression grew worse. And once in the heat of battle, he wouldn't wait for Samuel to come and bless the troops and bless them for their warfare. And he acted in the place of a priest. For Samuel was a priest and a prophet and a judge. And Father Saul acted in the place of a priest, and he blessed the troops and blessed the warfare. Just as Samuel was arriving, he chastised Saul and told him that that was not the will of God, and that God was displeased and would remove his spirit from him. And in fact, in time, there was another time that Father took spoils of war that God had specifically said, do not take any spoils, kill every man, woman, child, beast. But Father took the spoils and saved some lives. He shouldn't have, against God, confirming that he was not walking with God. And so things grew worse. And finally someone said, I heard a special musician. I think this musician would be of most help for you in your depression. And they told him of a man named David. Well, David had been chosen not just by the people who were talking to Father about soothing Father's depression, but David had been chosen by God sometime earlier, after the spirit had been removed from my father Saul. Samuel had heard the voice of the Lord telling him to go to a man named Jesse, who was in a Benjamite, who was in one of the towns of David. And David was selected to be the one whom God anointed. Samuel had looked at all the 8 sons of Jesse and had found only the youngest, the sheep herder, who was not even included in their company, for he was not a man of valor. He was a young boy, and he had been anointed to be king, the second king. And so when David was called to come to the palace, he obeyed his king, and he obeyed his God, and he served the king. He played his music. And then the Philistines rose up once again, and this time they had a challenger. They had Goliath. You've heard of Goliath, how big Goliath was. He was 9 feet tall. He was armored with golden helmet and a golden breastplate, and he had a shield bearer that walked out in front of him, protecting him. He carried a golden lance on his back, and his spear, probably the head of it weighed about 9 pounds just in the head of the spear. And he would come out daily and he would taunt the men in the morning and in the evening. He would taunt Israel, and he would say, let's settle this between 2 of us. You send me your best man and we'll fight. And if I win, you become our slaves. And if your man wins, we become your slaves. And no one would go out before him. King Saul sat in the tent, and he prayed to God, but the Spirit of the Lord had been removed from him, and his counselors were not any wiser. Well, one day, Jesse, David's father, said, go see how your brothers fare, for 3 of them had been sent into the battle. And he said, take them some bread and take them some wine and see how they're doing. Well, when David came to see how his brothers were doing, he arrived in time to hear Goliath and his taunt. His brothers, seeing him there, were very jealous, and they chastised him, and they taunted David, and they said, you're coming here out of pride. And David just defended the Lord and wanted to make sure that the Lord had a voice in the camp, and he volunteered with Saul that he would go up against Goliath. Now this was a big matter of faith for Saul, because Goliath had said, whoever you send, if I kill them, you will become my slaves. Saul outfitted David with his armor, and he said, I trust you to go in the name of the Lord. And he saw that the Lord was with David, but David couldn't move in Saul's armor, glorious as it was. So David took off Saul's armor, and he said he would just go with the Lord. And even without the Spirit of the Lord upon Saul for kingship, Saul recognized that the Lord was with David. And David went to the seabed, and he found smooth stones, and he took them with him. And he stood up and spoke for the Lord against Goliath, and Goliath laughed. But David put a smooth stone in his sling, and with the Spirit of the Lord, the stone went and collided with Goliath. And Goliath was down, and David destroyed him. That was the end of Goliath, and the Philistines ran away. David was a great hero. David came back into the king's favor, and David was also selected to be one who went into battle later again with the Philistines. For it was said that the king would give his firstborn daughter, Merab, to the man who brought 100 foreskins of Philistines to prove that he was a man of valor. And so the battle went on toward the Philistines to destroy the Philistines. And David came back with 100 foreskins, expecting to be given my sister Merab as his wife. But it didn't please my father, the king, that the women were singing songs about David being a greater victor than Saul. And so father reneged and gave Merab to another man. And it was that she bore him in the course of time 5 sons, and she died young. But I'm getting ahead of my story. And so again, the Philistines were on the uprising against the Israelites, and father gave the edict again that whoever would bring back 100 foreskins would be given me as his wife, his second-born daughter, Michal. And so David returned, and how joyful I was, for I loved David. It wasn't just his music or his physical beauty. It was his heart that was so hungry for God. A hungry heart, anointed of God, is irresistible. And so I was given as a wife for David, and I loved him. But my love for him was far greater than his for mine, for he had already bonded in love with my brother Jonathan. The two of them had made a pact that they would love one another forever, and that there would always be a place in each other's life for the seed of the other. And so it was with the children of Jonathan. They were as the children of David. I bore him no children in the course of our short time together, for father enraged himself against David over and over. David was playing for him one time, and father just rose up and tried to strangle him with his bare hands. Another time he threw a spear at him, and it just barely missed him. And another time he told Jonathan and the others around him how he was planning to kill David. When I was told of it, I told my husband, "Oh, husband, you must save yourself, for my father has vowed that tomorrow at this time you will be a dead man, and I do think he's going to carry it out. Please, for the love I have for you, let me lower you down the palace wall, and you can escape away. And my brother Jonathan can find out if it's true that he's bent on killing you. But you must be safe for now." And so my heart wanted to keep him and hold him and be with him, but it was more important to save his life. And so he left, and he went to the field to hide. And father sent men to come and take him, and I said, "Oh, he's asleep in bed." And I had put an image in the bed, and I had covered it with goat's hair that looked like the same color and texture of David's locks. And I had made it appear that he was sick in bed. And so the men went back and they told Saul, and Saul said, "Go get him, bed and all." And so they carried the bed into father. And of course, he tried to kill David and discovered that David was not in the bed. Then he called for me, and he asked me why I did that trick against him. And I told him, "Oh, but father, he told me it would be better for me to help him escape than for me to be dead also." I don't think father believed me, but he had no choice than to let me live. He was angry enough with me that he dishonored my marriage to David, and he sent me to live with another man. with that other man, I made a life, and I was able, when Merab died, I was able to take in her 5 sons and raise them, being their foster mother. And I cared for them, and I loved them, and I loved my husband with whom I was living, and he loved me dearly. He loved me more than David had loved me, which was a consolation in heart. And David went on to fight many battles with the enemies of God, with the enemies of the Israelites. And then Saul became his enemy, and David was defending himself over and over. And it was in the course of time that Saul went and sought a sorceress to tell him about the battle. And the sorceress called up Samuel for him. And Samuel prophesied to him that the next day he and his sons would be dead, and that David would rule the kingdom, because David had been faithful, and many times David could have killed Father Saul, but he hadn't, because he had respected the king, and that God had made him king, and that at God's appointed time he would no longer be king, and that David would be raised to kingship. And it came to pass, just as Samuel had said, the next day, Saul, my father, my brother Jonathan, and my other brothers, 3 of my brothers died. Ishbosheth was not there. He did not die. And so Abner, father's king, the king's guard, the commander-in-chief of the army, set the remaining son of Saul, Ishbosheth, as king. And Abner ruled keeping Ishbosheth as a puppet king. In fact, Abner even went in and he stole the affections by raping Rizpah. Rizpah was the concubine of my father. She had borne 2 sons, and they are my half-brothers. It was a sad story. Then Abner turned against Ishbosheth and made a treaty with David, and the men decided that they would go and they would kill Ishbosheth, my brother, in his bed while he slept, and they brought his head to David. And David said, because they had done such a deed in killing the king of Israel, they too would be killed. And the slayers of Ishbosheth were killed that very day. And then David made another deal with Abner. And he said he would only come and be king of Israel. He had been king of part of Israel, but he would be king of all of Israel only if Abner would return me, Michal, his first wife. Knowing I was with another man, knowing I was raising the sons of my sister, who should have been his first wife, and these should have been his sons. But he had already received sons from the wives he had taken while he was on the run from my father. For he had taken a wife named Abihim, and another one named Abigail, and others, and they had borne him sons. But now he required that I be returned to him as his wife. And so, with my husband following behind, crying after me, begging that I remain with him and the boys, I was taken by Abner, and my husband was ordered to return home. When David was made king, he came and he brought the Ark of the Covenant into town. and he did it disrespectfully. But the people didn't care because the ark was coming. David wore the garments of a priest, and David danced before the Lord in only those garments. He took off his outer garments and he wore just the priestly garments, showing everyone that he was in the place of a priest. And then he blessed the people, and he made sacrifices that only the priest was supposed to make. And David had never been called to be a priest. My father, in fact, was banished by God because he gave a blessing in the name of a priest. And so when David came to bless our house, I held him in contempt because he had violated the laws of God. And he had words with me, and he said, well, I'm better than all of your household, for God has chosen me in the place of all of your people. And I'm going to do things even more reviling because God's chosen me and I can. Well, later, God proved that David was wrong, but there were many heartaches, and too much to talk of now. And so let it be known to you, Abishag, that yes, as you cuddle and keep old feeble David warm in his aged condition and try to bring vitality to him, I bless you because he is our King, and I have returned to love him as King. So let's dine on some breakfast.